For men over 60, this idea may feel distant, especially when it comes to the subject of vitality, masculinity, and sexual confidence. But I want to open with this: your body hasn't given up on you. It's simply waiting for you to send it a signal that says, wake up. That signal doesn't come in a pill. It doesn't come from wishful thinking. It comes from action, small, repeatable action, rooted in how your biology actually works. Let's start with something you might not expect. The most important part of your male sexual function may not be your testosterone levels or even your blood pressure. It's your neural circuits, the silent messengers between your brain and your body that either stay active or go silent. And what we now understand from neuroscience is this: you can reawaken those circuits even after years of disuse in as little as 3 minutes a day. There's something incredibly powerful about what we do within the first few minutes of waking up. Those moments, often overlooked or rushed through, are biologically rich, a kind of gateway between the unconscious mind and the conscious body. And for men in their 60s, 70s, and beyond, what happens during that small window in the morning has the potential to reshape not only their physiology, but their sense of identity, strength, and connection to vitality. The truth is, sexual decline is not purely about aging. It's largely about disuse, misfiring circuits, ignored rhythms, and lost communication between systems that once worked like a symphony. In the male body, the interplay between neural signals, blood vessels, and hormonal pulses is essential for erectile function. The penis is not simply a hydraulic mechanism. It's a barometer of overall vascular, neurological, and hormonal health. When a man says he doesn't feel the same down there, it's not just about the physical experience. It's also a sign that deeper systems are falling out of sync. What science now reveals is that these systems can be recalibrated, even reactivated with targeted effort, even if that effort takes only 3 minutes each morning. It's not about intensity, it's about consistency, precision, and timing. Let's begin with a real-world scenario. Imagine a man named Sam. He's 68, retired, relatively healthy, but has noticed over the past year that things in the bedroom have become more uncertain. Erections are weaker, spontaneity is gone, and there's a quiet sense of loss, one he doesn't discuss, not even with his doctor. This isn't unusual. In fact, it's the norm. But what Sam doesn't know is that beneath that change is a loss of vascular tone, a drop in nitric oxide availability, and perhaps most importantly, a decline in pelvic floor muscle engagement. But this doesn't mean dysfunction is permanent. In fact, science shows us the opposite. Let's look at how just 3 minutes performed intentionally in the morning can begin to reverse this. It starts with breath. Breath is the bridge between the autonomic nervous system and conscious control. Inhalation, especially through the nose, activates the sympathetic nervous system, the same system involved in arousal, alertness, and readiness. But slow nasal breathing has another, less obvious benefit. It stimulates nitric oxide production. This gaseous molecule is a vasodilator. It tells your blood vessels to relax, to open. And it's created primarily in the paranasal sinuses. That means when you breathe through your nose slowly and deeply, you're sending a message to your vascular system: prepare to circulate. This message is critical in the morning. Upon waking, your testosterone levels are naturally at their highest, yet cortisol, the body's primary stress hormone, is also elevated. This balance is delicate. When cortisol is too high relative to testosterone, sexual function suffers. But slow breathing, specifically the 4-4-6 breathe, EPS, inhale 4 seconds, hold 4, exhale 6C, can blunt the cortisol spike while maintaining testosterone levels. In other words, breathing sets the stage for hormonal harmony and vascular readiness. This is not opinion. It's a biochemical fact supported by peer-reviewed studies on hormone rhythms, endothelial function, and breath-induced parasympathetic activation. Returning to Sam, imagine that instead of reaching for his phone or coffee first thing in the morning, he sits upright on the edge of his bed, feet flat, eyes relaxed, and begins his 3-minute protocol. First, the breath calm, measured nasal with the timing mentioned above. Within the first few rounds, his heart rate begins to settle. His blood vessels start to dilate. Nitric oxide rises. What he may not feel yet is that deep inside the small vessels supplying his pelvic region, blood flow is improving. This is the first domino. The second step is muscular and often neglected. The pelvic floor is not something most men think about, yet it's intimately tied to urinary control, erection firmness, and ejaculation. It comprises several muscles, but the most important for male function is the bulbocavernosus muscle. This ring, like muscle, wraps around the base of the penis and is responsible for creating the pumping action during arousal. But like any muscle, when it's not used, it weakens. Fortunately, it responds to training faster than most realize. The exercise is simple. Contract the pelvic floor as if stopping the flow of urine. Hold for 5 seconds, release. Repeat 10 times, that's 1 minute. But in that minute, a cascade of beneficial effects begins. First, blood is drawn into the area. The act of contracting and releasing acts like a pump, bringing oxygenated blood to tissues that may not have had it fully in years. Second, neuromuscular pathways, the connection between mind and muscle, are reawakened. When you actively engage the pelvic floor, your brain starts to rebuild the map of that region, sharpening awareness and control. Third, these contractions help flush out stagnation, both circulatory and neurological. Let's take a brief detour into neuroscience. The brain contains something called the homunculus, a cortical representation of the body. The genitals have a surprisingly large representation in this map, meaning they are wired for rich sensory feedback. However, if stimulation and movement in that area decline, the map fades. This is known as use it or lose it neuroplasticity. But just as it fades, it can be redrawn. Every time Sam engages his pelvic floor, he's redrawing the map. He's reminding his nervous system that this region is alive, active, and deserving of attention. Now to the 3rd minute movement. This may sound trivial, but it's not. Gentle hip rotations. Standing with feet shoulder width apart, hands on hips, stimulate the fascia and lymphatic flow in the lower abdomen and pelvis. The hips house major arteries and nerve plexuses that supply the entire groin region. When tight, the surrounding fascia can restrict circulation. Hip mobility exercises, done slowly and with intention, release these restrictions and further enhance blood flow. But more than that, they increase interoception, the internal sense of bodily awareness. When you feel your body from the inside, when you move it deliberately, you build a deeper connection to it. That connection is fundamental to restoring arousal and confidence. Sam doesn't need to do yoga or deadlifts. He just needs to wake up the systems. Gentle movement sends afferent signals, sensory input, back to the brain, reinforcing that the pelvic area is not dormant. The more signals received, the stronger the map becomes. This isn't mystical. It's rooted in the principle of Hebbian plasticity, neurons that fire together, wire together. There's a story told by a physical therapist who once worked with veterans recovering from spinal injury. One patient had lost sensation in his lower limbs, but was instructed to think about moving his toes every morning. After months of consistent mental engagement, no visible movement, just intention, those neural pathways began to rebuild. The patient began to feel tingling, then slight twitches, and eventually regained partial control. That's the power of consistent neural messaging, and it applies just as powerfully to sexual function. Older men often ask whether it's too late. The answer is no. It's never too late to reestablish these connections. In fact, older men may benefit more quickly because their decline often stems not from permanent damage, but from neglect and inactivity. Muscles respond within weeks. Blood vessels regenerate. Nerves remap. Hormones recalibrate, but only when consistently nudged in the right direction. There's a critical point about timing. Doing this in the morning isn't arbitrary. That's when your hormonal environment is most plastic. Testosterone naturally peaks within 30-60 minutes of waking. If that window is paired with the right input, breath work to lower cortisol, movement to promote circulation, muscle engagement to trigger awareness. The entire endocrine system responds more favorably throughout the day. That's when confidence returns. That's when vitality builds. The body loves rhythm, and when you show it consistency, it shows you results. Another layer involves dopamine. When men begin to feel progress, a stronger morning erection, more sensation, improved urinary control, dopamine is released. Dopamine is the neurochemical of motivation, and it reinforces behavior. So a virtuous cycle begins. The practice feeds progress. Progress feeds motivation. Motivation sustains the practice. The beauty is, it all begins with 3 minutes. To tie this to evolutionary biology, remember that male sexual function evolved not just for reproduction, but as a signal of health and viability. Strong blood flow, muscular tone, and neurovascular sensitivity are indicators of an organism's fitness. Even today, these systems remain deeply tied to our self-perception. When that part of the body is functioning well, men feel grounded, energetic, and capable. When it's not, they feel invisible, unsure, or even ashamed. But shame only persists in the absence of action. Once movement begins, shame has nowhere to live. Another example, a client in his early 70s began this practice not for sex, but for prostate recovery. After surgery, he felt disconnected from his body, numb, unconfident. But within days of doing these simple exercises, he noticed something unexpected. Sensation returned. Confidence returned. Not because he regained perfect function, but because he felt engaged with that part of his body again. It reminded him he was still alive in all the ways that mattered. Every day we make decisions about what parts of ourselves we keep alive. The act of breathing intentionally, engaging the pelvic floor, and moving the hips is not just physical, it's a declaration, a statement that this part of you still matters, that your vitality is not something of the past. And what the science shows us is that the body listens to that declaration, not with words, but with systems realigning, pathways reopening, and energy returning. This is the beginning of a new rhythm. 3 minutes that serve as a reset button for your nervous system, cardiovascular health, muscular engagement, and hormonal flow. Not because time reverses, but because the brain and body are willing partners, as long as they receive clear, repeated signals. What was once quiet begins to awaken, and what was once forgotten returns, not as memory, but as function, not as youth, but as presence, not as fantasy, but as physiology responding to intention, one morning at a time, one breath,